Scott Johnson from Bloomberg. I'm an economist here in London. And it's really, it's an honor to be in this space and also to share it with so many distinguished investors, academics, thought leaders, policymakers. I'm not sure which box I exactly fit into. I think I'd perhaps be maybe more a gloomy market economist, one of those that we heard about a little bit earlier. I've certainly, have to admit, I've written the occasional gloomy piece about demographic trends when putting forecasts together. But I think with some of the earlier panels really highlight the challenge for the profession, both in terms of the way we project productivity, the way we forecast that into the future, but also in the way that we measure it, because I think as economists we need to think about age very differently than we have been. So I've actually brought some data for you today that's probably less economics and more accounting, but the accounting is very important. What we've done is to benchmark countries on a number of health indicators. We have 169 in all, countries, not indicators, as well as health risk factors. And this is actually an endeavor of some of my colleagues at Bloomberg News. The first one came out in 2017, as Tafina mentioned, but we've just released this, the most recent edition in 2019. It's all public data, so if you disagree with any of our assumptions or the way we've done the scoring, you're absolutely welcome to try it yourself in the comfort of your own home. But before I go on, curious, some of you may have read the articles, but does anyone have a guess at what we found to be the healthiest country? Many of them are up there in the top 10, yes, but I heard Spain over here. Japan is, I think I just turned that off, yeah. Japan is I think we had number 4. So Spain is at the top of the list. Spain, Italy, Iceland, Japan, Switzerland, Sweden. Why Spain? I must admit, I'm probably not in the best position in this room to explain why Spain. I think if I were to look through the lens of what I do every day, I'd probably say inconclusive elections. That must help. It'd be probably a good sign for the UK then. But most of the explanations I've seen have focused on diet, the Mediterranean diet, with Spain, Italy up there. I think it's less so necessarily what people are eating and more about the culture of food, and I think the way people approach healthy habits and behaviors. And also I think Spain gets relatively good marks from the European Commission on its health system, in particular preventative care. But this is a forum. Certainly interrupt me if anyone has any thoughts as I go through. I'm here to talk about the data, but I think the context, that's what I think we all bring together to this.
Sorry, what's the UK?
Oh, so the UK, well, I'll get to that. The UK is number, I think, 19, right? So for Spain, this was actually a jump in the rankings. In 2017, Spain was number 6. Italy was, I think, number 1 previously. So both of them are still up there. UK is a little bit down the list. UK, I think, US is number 35. Germany is in the middle, and then China is down at 52. But that really belies an incredible transformation in China. I think that most of us are probably aware of China in terms of life expectancy. China today it's been a dramatic transformation that mirrors the economic miracle. Countries at the bottom, quite a few countries in sub-Saharan Africa, unfortunately.
Is Spain because of also the social networks and how well they are minded, the elders being children, etc. Does that impact?
I would think so. I'm curious. If anyone has experience with that directly. I would think, once I show you some of what we've got in the index, that might answer the question a little bit. The index itself is relatively simple. We have a health grade, and then we have a health score, which is these are the health factors that I mentioned before, and then we've subtracted health penalties from that score. And so the health score itself, we have really 3 categories, 3 composites for causes of death, life expectancy, survival ratios. These are actually very similar measures in some senses. And then within those, though, we have subcategories that we've scored on a 0 to 100 scale. And then that we're actually equally weighting within those categories, and then equally weighting from across the 3. So certainly you can you can take your own adventure with this if you'd like to weight other factors. Now, the first one, causes of death. When we look at this overall, Japan's at the top, not in terms of mortality rates. I figured you'd probably be more interested in the rankings and not so much in the numbers. So Japan looks very good overall. But when we break this down by communicable diseases, non-communicable diseases, and injuries, the rankings actually change quite a bit. And Spain is kind of a commonality across all three, ranking in the top 5. UK, similar to its overall rankings, 21, US at 34. Life expectancy, this is one I think that we probably all think about the most. Again, Japan is towards the top of the list, but it mirrors our top 10. UK is a little bit lower, US is a little bit lower. The leaders here are really, we're talking about 83 to 84 years, I believe. The UK behind, but only at 82. I think the US is around 80. And so the countries at the bottom, though, we're looking at 50 to 60 years. So that is a dramatic gap. And survival ratios are a relatively similar concept, but if life expectancy is focusing on the average, survival ratios are a little bit more in terms of the level. We're looking at a hypothetical cohort of 1,000 people born and how many of them will make it to these different mileposts. Again, it's Japan, Iceland, Singapore, Estonia. UK is farther behind in this ranking and the US as well. So those three together, those will be that's our health score, but we're subtracting, we're penalizing on a number of behavioral and environmental factors. So that's a 0 to 10 scale, because we don't want to have any negative numbers here. And we've averaged the scores across those categories. So on the behavioral side, you can probably guess most of what we included. It's a lot of things that people can affect in their own lives: blood pressure, glucose levels, cholesterol levels, obesity, tobacco and alcohol use, inactivity. Mental health, I think this is a weakness for the index, actually. We've only used suicide rates, but obviously that is just a fraction of what we should be thinking about in terms of mental health issues and concerns. Childhood malnutrition, and then immunization as well. So this is, if you look at best to worst, I won't take you through the rankings individually, but the UK does pretty well on blood pressure and glucose levels. But if you look worst to best, the UK is in the bottom 25, I think, on cholesterol. Doesn't quite make the bottom 25 on obesity and inactivity, but it's down there. The US, however, does. You can also see, I think, on alcohol use and mental health, the UK performs a little bit poorly. So in addition to the behavioral factors, we have environmental factors. We've called these exogenous, but really these are things that policy can affect: carbon emissions, access to clean water, sanitation. And for, in terms of clean water and sanitation, it's really almost an alphabetized list of wealthy countries. And what we can see, on the right-hand side, the countries that do much worse are typically poor countries. This is, if anybody's interested in the slides, we have these rankings online, and I won't go country by country, but you can see Spain at the top here. Spain does well on both the health scores and also has relatively smaller health penalties subtracted. Italy as well. So the rankings look relatively robust. And take you through those. Now, obviously, we're not the first, and we won't be the last to do something like this, and our index is relatively simple in construction. I think one of the most interesting studies I've seen as I was looking through other indexes came from the University of Washington, and researchers there actually projected life expectancy out to 2040. Their list actually looks very similar to ours. Spain at the top, Japan, and that's really a gain of, I think, 2 years in life expectancy, or roughly. So that's pretty encouraging. The Legatum Institute had a prosperity index, and within that they had a health scoring system as well, and I think they emphasized a little bit more health infrastructure was the main difference, as well as I think some additional mental health measures. Singapore's at the top, Luxembourg, Japan, Spain is actually only, I think, number 22, but the UK and the US in their relative positions looks very similar to our index. And then the Indigo Wellness Index. This one takes into account happiness among a few other factors, and also very interesting to look into. Canada's at the top there, and I think the UK makes it in the top 25. So as I said, this is an endeavor of my colleagues in Bloomberg News. It's Lee Miller, Wei Liu, and Dave Merrill. So any praise that you have for this, I'll send on to them. But any feedback, any questions, the slides are mine, please send my way. And I'd be interested if anyone has any thoughts now. I think we might have some time for questions.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
It's often reported that the National Health Service is the best health system in the world. The Commonwealth Fund last year. What are your observations about the gap between that finding and your findings?
I think it's very interesting. Well, I think we're looking at health outcomes versus policy, and I think that's a very difficult one to follow. Many of the countries that appear in the top have robust health systems, similar to the UK. When we're looking at behavioral factors, however, the UK performs very differently. Spain, I think across a number of the indicators, was in a much better position. The UK certainly has a little bit to worry about. Now, does that come down to the NHS? I don't think so. I mean, I think really what we're talking about is the limits of data. In something that is a relatively blunt instrument like this, it's a starting point, but we really have to drill into that much more closely. Does anyone else have any thoughts on why?
Is there a correlation between your outcome and health expenditure as a share of GDP?
I have not looked at that. That's an interesting one.
I think the NHS gets good outcomes per pound spent rather than anything else.
The cost effectiveness of dealing with disease, which is not the same as the health of the nation.
Sure, yeah, certainly in
Do
terms
you
of
find
cost.
there's a lot of nationalism involved in this? That people complain because their countries are not highly ranked? It's a bit like the Eurovision Song Contest or something. The UK always loses there, by the way. So
Yeah, something I found, one headline I saw after we released this was Morocco's neighbors perform well on the Healthiest Countries Index. So I thought that was very interesting. People certainly do look to see what their countries land. I mean, it's a static snapshot. For China to land at 52, as I said, I mean, I think that the story of life expectancy in China it's dramatic. It's almost shocking when you see the gains that China has made. So when you have a snapshot like this, we did hear from some countries that felt like perhaps they could be higher. But it's equally weighted data. I mean, there are other ways to look at this as well.
it's a great idea because it provides a competitive angle for countries to improve, basically. And presumably their populations will look at this and say, we're not good enough, we have to improve. I think it's a wonderful thing.
Well, and a lot
Can
of
we
this.
announce it next year at the results of the next longevity forum?
Well, I'll have to check. Typically, our plan was to do this every 2 years, and so we did this in 2017, again earlier this year. But if there's interest, I think, yeah, we'd love to.
And to Jim's point, have governments or house systems actually come to you yet and said, can you pinpoint where we're lagging? Are they benchmarking best practice?
I've not heard that, but the thing is, it's relatively easy to see. All this data is publicly available, and in many cases, we've through averaging, there's some double counting that you could see. So it's not me personally, no. No.
Can I ask about behavioural metrics?
Yes.
What are you measuring? I presume smoking, drinking, diet, stuff like that.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So we have right. So. This is just incidence of elevated blood pressure, elevated glucose and cholesterol levels, obesity prevalence, tobacco and alcohol use.
Are these self-reported or are they?
Well, exactly. I've wondered about that for some of these. There are intuitions. Where regions of the world where alcohol use is much lower, obviously.
Or perception of alcohol use is much lower.
Right. Exactly.
Spending time in Spain is quite interesting, looking at the relationship with alcohol, but it's a much more balanced relationship. I wouldn't say the quantity is very low. But there was one thing I wanted to point out about Spain. For anyone who spent some time over there, their interval between eating is far greater than our interval between eating. And intermittent fasting is one of the things that may actually help improve health. Now, having gone to Spanish conferences and had conference dinners at 11:30 at night and not having had anything since 8 o'clock in the morning, that's intermittent fasting in my view. So have you looked at patterns of eating as well as actually food intake?
No, we haven't. In fact, food intake is not, I mean, aside from obesity, we're looking at outcomes, but we haven't really looked at the inputs. And I think that'd be an interesting thing to include in the index, actually. Sure.
Sort of regions and city-states, sort of like to find that they call blue zones, like areas of longevity, for instance. There might be sort of hidden extra sort of winning city-states. There's a much, like within those countries, there's a much better that we could be sort of competing to be as good as.
Right. We haven't, but I mean, a country that comes to mind is Russia, for example. Huge gaps in life expectancy between residents of Moscow and St. Petersburg versus some of the other regions. Yeah. Sure.
Have you considered income inequality in your health risks? And countries where there are minimum wages, for example, or minimum benefits? Because that must make a big difference.
We have not, but this is inspiring because I for the most part, write economic research, and this is something that our news division's done. But I think that would be a way to really connect the two. That'd be fascinating. Certainly, both health outcomes and also some of the inequality inputs. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Oh, go ahead. Oh.
I'm really surprised to see that top one healthy country. I just wanted to check whether have you done any analysis on the population and where they are based, because Spain has a very aged population, and most of that population is actually not living in the main cities. It's more in the rural areas. My family comes from rural areas, and I see how that people behave, the habits, the routine, the diet is much healthier than when you live in a city. My grandmother passed away last year, and she was 100 years old, and she was living in a small village in the middle of nowhere, but she was, raising all her food. I do believe that has a component, so I just wanted to check whether in the Spain data that you collected, that was a big factor, because I'm quite surprised. People in Spain still smoke. I am a smoker. People in Spain still eat really late at night. I don't think that's healthy, eating at midnight and then go to bed at 1 a.m. So it's in the north. I'm coming from the north. The diet is really heavy when it comes to fat, because you need to cope with the cold. So yeah, NHS, we have a supposedly great NHS system, very expensive, but the waiting list is still, months, sometimes years. So I'm quite surprised about being top one of the index.
Well, that's where the data meets real experiences. But it's true. I mean, you're looking at average numbers across these countries, and in some cases that average is beneficial, and in others it's probably distortive.
To comment on that, so if the data is correct, you never know. We focus too much on the hospital and on the medical system, because I've relatives in Italy, I lived in Italy, The majority of the people, and we talk about Spain, the same thing on the countryside, never go to hospital. Hospitals in Italy are corrupted, very inefficient, They're not as good as here, so it's lifestyle, Lifestyle is much more important than that. You have to change your lifestyle, and then your expectancy goes up, but not super duper clinics. Because for the majority of people, they can't afford.
Right. I think it'd be interesting to build a composite like this to try to capture some of those lifestyle elements. I mean, if we simply, I haven't looked at if you just look at alcohol use, for example. I think that's far too blunt. But there have to be some proxies, almost instrumental variables that we could look at.
Great. Thank you,
sure.
Scott. If you'd like to stay, feel free to chat with Scott afterwards. We're just running out of time, and we've got a couple more speakers.
Thanks very much,
Thank you so much, but we look forward to seeing the next one.